Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the forum at St. Bart's. My name is Peter Thompson, and I'm the Associate Rector for Formation and Liturgy here, and it is good to see you all, or be with you all virtually this morning again. And it is great to be with my friend and colleague, the Reverend Susan Anderson-Smith, who is joining us from home this morning. Susan, it is great to see you.
Well, it's great to see you, Peter, and it's great to be gathered even virtually with you and all of those who have joined us this Palm Sunday morning. Thank you for doing that.
And thank you for being with us, Susan. Today we're going to talk about COVID-19 from a social justice and reconciliation perspective, and we're so glad that you're here to have this conversation with us. I want to invite those of you who are watching and listening out there to send in your questions. We're not going to be having a long presentation at the beginning this morning. We're trying to save most of this time for your questions. You can do that in multiple ways. You can send an email to me, P. Thompson, PTHOMPSON at stbarts.org. That's STBARTS.org. Or you can simply write your question into the chat either on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. But to begin, Susan, just tell us a little bit about your role at St. Bart's. What does justice and reconciliation mean, and what might justice and reconciliation mean in the context of this time in which we're living?
Well, I think to start with just a really basic understanding of justice and reconciliation. Justice, of course, is the concern for the equitable treatment of all people. Reconciliation is the bringing back together, the restoring of things. And that's pretty much just textbook definition. Those two words take on some additional meaning once they're situated within a faith community. Justice in a faith community is really about not only the equitable treatment of all people, but it's about paying particular attention, having particular concern for the most vulnerable members of society. And along with the acts of mercy and compassion that is a part of justice. Justice is about working to undo institutions that perpetuate the suffering experienced by the most vulnerable members of society. And it's also about dismantling humanly constructed categories that diminish the sacred nature of our humanity. Reconciliation within a faith community is about restoring humanity. It's about healing human relationships. And I borrow from our Jewish siblings the idea of tikkun olam, which is healing the world. And that's really what justice and reconciliation is for us these days.
And what might justice and reconciliation, what role might those things have to play in this time in which we find ourselves in dealing with a global health pandemic?
Well, as people of faith, we're charged with this. We have multiple places to go to understand that justice and reconciliation are the endpoints of our faith. Justice and reconciliation are lived out faith. it begins, for me at least, with being created in the image and likeness of God, the Imago Dei, and that suggests to me that that there is something within each of us that is of God, and that we need to see each other that way. We have the covenant. I will be your God, and you will be my people. So we believe in a God that provides, that delivers, that loves. And our part of that covenant is about being God's people and caring for all and seeking equity for all and paying particular attention to the most vulnerable people in society. The prophets then came and reminded God's people of that when they had gone astray. Jesus, in his teachings of service and of whatever you do to the least of these members of my family, you do to me. In the Acts of the Apostles, the early Jesus movement, we find that the apostles pooled their resources. They shared everything that they had, and they made sure that everyone had enough. In our own baptismal covenant, the last two questions that we promise have to do with being just and with reconciling, that we seek and serve Christ in all persons, that we work to establish God's reign of justice and reconciliation. And I think these concepts are so important right now. And in our conversations earlier this week, I so appreciate your drawing out a couple of things. The first thing that you mentioned was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous quote, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." You also reminded me of the first part of the Labor Day collect. Almighty God, you have so linked our lives one with another that all we do affects, for good or ill, all other lives. So guide us in the work we do, that we may not do it for self alone, but for the common good. I have seen also on Facebook, I don't know if you all have been following this particular thread, but a lot of people are bringing back up the whole butterfly effect. The notion that everything that we do has an impact on everything else. And I think that is the most important understanding for us to have right now in terms of justice and reconciliation. What we know is that this virus is no respecter of social location. We know that it does not have a target population, that all of us are in danger. And what has happened is that the most vulnerable members of our society before this pandemic have become even more so now. People who have been trying to survive on the streets, unsheltered, food insecure, now even have that lifeline threatened. People who have been trying to survive in substandard housing, where they have been crowded in, families into small spaces, do not have the luxury of distancing and trying to protect themselves from the contagion. Immigrants have been in detestable situations anyway, and now even much more so because of those conditions and crowding. There is great concern about people who are incarcerated for the same reasons. So we're being forced to recognize and respond to the reality of our interconnectedness within the human family. We are all related and we are all kin. And we cannot deny our human relationships without denying God. So it is of extreme importance that we remember this in all of the decisions that we are making about creating distance, creating physical distance. Now, let me draw a distinction between physical distance and social distance. That's really, really important. The physical distance piece is so that we are not contaminating each other. The social distance is something that we are trying to bridge. I mean, I really see that as part of reconciliation. It's very important for us to stay connected, to find ways to reach out virtually, on the phone, and any other way that we can think of. Writing note cards, writing letters. I think it's also important for us to combat fear with knowledge. To combat fear with knowledge. And I have been growing more and more concerned by things that I hear about vulnerable populations being both the source and cause of what we're going through now. And I want to guard against that in every way possible. That there is no reason. We understand about this virus, and it is not something that any particular group distributes at all. And I just think that it's very, very important to combat this kind of fear with knowledge, and to do what we can to educate people and to guard against this kind of hurtful rhetoric. And I guess finally, I would encourage everyone listening to kind of find your passion in the world right now and act on it. Find your passion for justice in the world and act on it. There are plenty of organizations who need you right now, and there are plenty of, and I'm happy to, when I get finished here, to give you some suggestions. And I guess the last thing to share with regard to this is I was online last night with the Green Faith organization, and they have put together one of the most beautifully articulated statements for care and resilience during this time. As I think I just said multi-faith, and it's a wonderful piece that calls us into justice and reconciliation. It is a time to connect, to build relationships with our neighbors, to use our collective power and resources to support our entire communities. As people of faith and spirit, we can check in with and support our neighbors. We can provide much needed spiritual, emotional, and material support as we can. We can share with each other and take only what we need. We can be a part of implementing policies that ensure love, justice, and compassion for the most vulnerable among us. There are plenty of petitions to sign these days, I assure you. We can ensure health care, paid sick leave, and food and shelter for all. We can protect everyone's human rights and dignity. As people of faith and spirit, we believe that the measurement of a healthy society is how we treat those who are most vulnerable. We have a moral responsibility to build that healthy society together, a society rooted in love, justice, and compassion.
Thank you, Susan, for so adroitly and comprehensively outlining all of that for us. We actually have several questions have come in already, and I do encourage those of you who have more questions to write them into us via the chat feature on Facebook or YouTube, or you can email me. My email, again, is pthompson, THOMPSON, @stbarts.org, STBARTS.org. Susan, you mentioned taking only what you need, and one of our questions is getting at that dilemma of how much we take care of ourselves, how much we take care of others. How do we navigate that balance? And specifically, this person mentions Crossroads, Crossroads Community Services, which I know you spent some time as the interim executive director of. That's in residence here at St. Bart's and is feeding a lot more people during this time. And this person mentioned specifically, this sort of dilemma of wanting to take care of themselves, but also wanting to volunteer and help for others, and knowing that they have to risk their own health to come out and volunteer. And since it's a very practical dilemma that you're familiar with, I'm wondering if you can speak about that, as well as kind of this balance between taking what we need for ourselves and caring for other people.
Well, let me address that piece first. I think that it's really it's human nature that in a time of fear that we want to plan for the worst case scenario. I mean, I just think I think it's natural that we want to take all that we can. That's not judgment. It's just fear. The only thing that I have found helpful in that is when I have to make a grocery store run, I just get a little amount, because I know that eventually I will need to go back. So it's about taking what it is that you believe that you would need in this moment, and trusting that provision will be made down the road. And that, That is so much easier said than done. I don't think there's anybody who's more afraid of running out of toilet paper than I am, you know? I mean, that's just a nightmare for me. But, then I think about what a luxury that is, that I am only worried about toilet paper, right? I mean, such a luxury, where there are people lining up at Crossroads who are worried that they are not going to be fed. Yes, I've got the statistics from Crossroads, where in the meals have the demand for meals has doubled, and I suspect that it's only going to get worse as more people are unemployed and run through their savings and find themselves needing to take advantage of these systems, of these organizations that are doing this. And what I can say about Crossroads is it's been ongoing prayer about continuing to offer these services, and it's been ongoing making sure that Crossroads is living within the guidelines that have been laid out by both church and state, procuring the necessary things to keep people safe, to keep the distance. There are ways to be helpful at Crossroads without coming into contact with large lines and groups of people. And one of those ways is to be a cook, is to go in and help prepare the meals, which now are all grab and go. And so there's a lot, and because there's a lot more of them, there's a lot more cooking necessary. There's also a need for people to go in and package those meals, to put them in the containers so that they are ready to be put out for people to pick up. The pantry, I believe, is a place where people can also bag groceries that are then handed out to pantry guests. And I know that last week the pantry numbers dropped off a little bit, and David Sanders, who is the manager, is trying to figure out how to make sure that the people are still getting the food. So there's delivery kinds of things, and everything on Crossroads website at this point, you can go there to find out these ways to volunteer. But there's very clear and transparent language about risks and about understanding where people may choose or not choose to volunteer. And then there's always monetary donations. It costs now only about $1.80 per meal. And that includes everything, the packaging, the food, everything. $1.80 per meal. So just think of what your dollars can buy.
Yes, and it's really fun to see the chat going on. There's a lot of love for Crossroads in the chat. And you're sort of singing Egan's tune because she reminded folks that they can, if they can't volunteer, they can donate. And that's a way in which they can contribute. Patrick Berquist of Episcopal Charities reminds us that there is abundance. And Crossroads board members, Maury and Kathleen Brighton, are there. And I just want you to know that there's a lot of love for Crossroads in the comments.
Oh, sure.
And commitment to the mission of Crossroads. The website for Crossroads is crossroadsnyc.org, and we'll put that in the chat as well, so you all can access that if you're able to donate or volunteer. That would be really helpful. So there is a question coming in that's reminding us that of the global nature of this pandemic, and is especially concerned about wealthy countries bidding up essential supplies, medical supplies. We've seen reports in the past few days about countries sort of going it for themselves. The United States blocking shipments to other countries so that they can get this kind of PPE, the personal protective equipment, life-saving things like ventilators. Any thoughts on this sort of global village and how we respect other countries in our desire to combat the virus?
Well, I think that this has always been a problem, and this pandemic has simply intensified. Again, I think it is rooted in the terror of not having enough. I think it's rooted in a theology of scarcity rather than one of abundance. And that's not just individuals, that's entire countries. And this has been going on before we got to this point. What immediately comes to mind to get more information and perhaps become more involved globally is, of course, our own Episcopal Relief and Development. Their website is chock-a-block full of information about what is going on globally, where the Episcopal Church is stepping into that, and some opportunities to be involved. Let's see.
Susan, your mic went a little bit soft. I don't know if something happened on your end. I just wanted to alert you to that.
All right.
We can still hear you.
How's that?
Good.
I kind of just trailed off. So, Episcopal Relief and Development. Right now I can't find that, but Episcopal Relief and Development is the presence of the Episcopal Church in the global community, especially with regard to situations like this, disaster, and relieving that, and partnering with local communities, empowering them to use their gifts and the resources they do have, or to get the resources they need to take care of their communities. So that's Episcopal Relief and Development.
Another question regards politics, and you actually were originally scheduled this week to end our religion and politics series, which we kind of had to take a pause on to discuss some of the COVID-19 concerns. Any thoughts on the religion and politics dynamic that you were originally going to share in that forum, and how that dynamic might apply in this situation? How can our political discourse shift because of the virus? How should it shift?
Yeah. Well, I've been hopeful recently that because this pandemic has brought us all to our knees, whatever political or faith stripe we might have. I was hopeful with the passing of legislation. While not perfect, it seemed to bring people together in a way that nothing has. And my only sadness is that it took this to do it, but I am hopeful. And I would continue to pray for our leaders, that they would continue to reach across aisles and reach across traditions in order, to protect the dignity and the safety of all of us. I think it's still important to sign petitions. I think that's one of the ways that we can be most politically active, is to look at what's coming out of places like the Episcopal Public Policy Network is a tremendous place. That is the Office of Government Relations. That's this church's voice in Washington, and they have some magnificent things going on. And it doesn't matter what your politics are. It's just about supporting things, legislation, and movements that will protect us and protect the dignity and take care of the most vulnerable members of our society. So that's the Episcopal Public Policy Network. There is also Episcopal Migration Ministries, which can also be found on the church's National Church's website. But there's some really beautiful things being written there. They have actually a Stations of the Cross that they have been doing in order to talk about the plight of immigrants and how we as people of faith can work toward that, toward caring for them. So.
There's Rob Ratke thanks you for the shout-out for development, and we've put the link to Episcopal Relief and Development in the chat, and I think we can do that for Episcopal Migration Ministries as well. You mentioned the Office of Government Relations for the Episcopal Church, and one of the speakers we were supposed to have, and we hope to have again in the future, is the director of that office, Rebecca Lindler Blatchley. She was supposed to be here a few weeks ago, and the virus got in the way of that. But I noticed that this week they posted some resources for helping Episcopalians understand fake news, and someone hearkened to your fear versus knowledge kind of dialectic, and I'm wondering how staying informed and having the right knowledge can be a part of doing justice in this moment, or at least preparing ourselves to do justice.
Right. Well, I think the Office of Government Relations is a great source, and it's broad. I mean, these days when they're writing things, they're writing multiple pieces that give context and give why it's important to do or to support a particular thing. I guess the vast majority of my information does not come from Facebook or Instagram or things like that, and that may be more a function of my age than anything else. But I have found myself gravitating toward organizations that have been trustworthy in the past. And yes, many of them happen to be Episcopal in nature. I mean, you can take the girl out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the girl. So places like Green Faith and ERD and Episcopal Public Policy Network and Episcopal Migration Ministries, are just reputable and grounded for me, and they have important information. So
Thank you. There's a question about, we talked a little bit about politics, about how voting might happen.
Yeah.
Voter registration efforts, campaigning, that has all been curtailed. How since we're all staying in place, how is that going to affect the coming election season, and what we should do to make sure that voters are registered and people get out the vote?
Well, I'm watching closely the when conventions are being moved and how the state has already moved primary things and all that. And so I just think it's really important to stay on top of those kinds of things. I mean, I think that there, at least at this point, I pray that there will be opportunities for all of that and for primaries. I'm going to be looking this week with a parishioner at Reclaiming Our Vote, which is a movement geared toward helping to get folks who have been expunged from voter registration lists, who perhaps do not even know it, trying to get those people aware that they've been expunged so that they can get their names back on voter registration. So I'm going to be working with a parishioner this week to see how we at St. BART'S might be a part of something like that. We may have to get a little bit more creative, but I'm hoping for something like that, to be able to offer that in the near future.
I encourage folks, we do have a few more minutes left. I encourage you to send in your questions. You can do that via the chat feature on Facebook or on YouTube, or you can also email them to me at pthompson@stbarts.org, and we'll try to get to them in the next few minutes. Susan?
I want to put a plug in for the census.
Yeah, I got my form in the past week or two.
Do it. Please, please, please.
And I know there's a church effort to get people to fill out the census. I know faith communities are involved in trying to ensure people actually fill those forms out.
Yeah.
Great. So someone mentioned the HIV crisis, and I know we talked a bit with Jerry Anderson when he was here, your mentor and colleague when he was here to speak at Pride last year. And I'm wondering what you see as the connections between the tough years of the HIV crisis and this virus. What are the similarities and differences, and what might they say about our justice obligations and concerns?
I think the difference is that the onset of this is much more intense, and the numbers of people that we're talking about are staggeringly different. Some of the similarities that I see have to do with the stigma, with just the stigma. For a long time, ultimately, we with HIV, we learned what the cause of it, is, and how it's transmitted. And yet I still remember days when people would refuse to drink out of a cup or to be close to someone living with HIV, and that was within the church. And so there's a stigma. And in my own pastoral care, I have experienced people reluctant to tell me that they have tested positive for COVID-19, or that they are somehow living with it. That's pretty sad to me. The stigma that is already arising around this. And I just pray that we understand completely that there is no one person or group or type of person that is targeted by this disease. Any one of us, it is an equal opportunity pandemic, and that any of us would have it doesn't say anything about who we are, our value in the world, and our preciousness in the sight of God. So
I'm curious, Susan, as we come to a close, today is Palm Sunday, and I'm about to go downstairs in a bit and participate in a service that we will live stream and that I encourage you all to attend online beginning at 11. What does Palm Sunday have to tell us about justice? I know that was part of why we scheduled you on this day originally. And what at all might Palm Sunday have to say about this time that we're in?
I'm reading. It was so lovely this morning or last night to read the beautiful writing that our colleague Chris Lewis Stearman provided for us in her A Journey We Could Not Imagine. This riding into Jerusalem is a great paradox and a great irony for me, because there's so little justice in our worldview about what happens to Jesus. And yet, this moment and the week that follows it is all about God's justice and God's reconciling the world. It's about Jesus not refusing to give in to the powers and principalities, refusing to give in to the status quo, because, as Chris says, and it's a popular phrase, love wins. Love wins. And this is the reconciling nature of the God of radical love that we know. And that's what today is. We're
going to try to fit in one more question before we head down, because we just got one in, and I want to honor that. I think many of our viewers know that you co-founded a school with your wife, and a large part of your ministry over the years has been to youth and children. And one of your former colleagues, Linda Cato, has written in, and she's wondering about how we can uplift kids at this time, especially kids that are living in poverty. How do we best minister to kids in this time? Schools are staying open, provide meals, even though they've had to stop classes, but there's inequities in terms of digital access, all that kind of stuff. How do we best uplift our kids?
Dear Ms. Cato, I worry about our Imago Dei kids, because they are some of the most vulnerable members of society, and they don't always have access. What I would say is, if there are children anywhere in your life, reach out to them, call them, write them, listen to them. Children are such great teachers of what is ultimately important. Children are such great prayers. They know how to ask God for what they need. And children can be they can be so empowering for all of us. But reach out, find the children in your life, and be one of the helpers that Mr. Rogers talks about. Be the helper, making sure that the children in your life and around you have access to food and to love and to shelter and to opportunities to continue to live abundantly.
Thank you so much, Susan, for joining us this morning from home. Thank you all for watching out there. I'm going to go and get ready for this service, but I really appreciate you all being here, and Susan, for discussing these important things in such a difficult time for all of us.
Thank you. God bless you all.
Take care.
Take care.